name's Matthew, and I post videos every Monday and Friday. So if you love the tingles, then do hit that subscribe button because you are in the right place. Now, before we get into the case of Jeffrey Dahmer, just a reminder that my Instagram and TikTok are in the description below, and I am on the hunt for more cases, either true crime or maybe some paranormal cases, suggestions that you would like to hear. So yeah, if you've got any, leave them below. And yeah, let's get into tonight's true crime session. So tonight we are going to be exploring a case that is both chilling and deeply unsettling. This is the story of Jeffrey Dahmer, also known as the Milwaukee Cannibal. So Jeffrey Lionel Dahmer was born on May 21st, 1960 in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. He was the first of two sons born to Lionel and Joyce Dahmer. From the outside, the Dahmer family seemed like any other, but behind closed doors there were signs of tension and dysfunction. Jeffrey's mother Joyce suffered from depression and was often emotionally unstable. She struggled to connect with her children, and her marriage to Lionel was fraught with arguments. Lionel, a research chemist, was frequently absent due to work, leaving Jeffrey feeling lonely and neglected. As a child, Jeffrey was described as shy, introverted, and oddly fascinated by death. While the other children played games and sports, Jeffrey spent his time collecting insects and dissecting roadkill. He would bring the remains back to a makeshift lab he created in the backyard, where he would bleach the bones and meticulously study them. His father, mistaking this for a budding interest in biology, encouraged Jeffrey's curiosity, unaware of the dark path it would lead him down. During his adolescence, Jeffrey's sense of isolation deepened. He struggled with his sexuality, feeling confused and ashamed of his attraction to the other boys at school. He was an outcast, often ridiculed by his peers, and he turned to alcohol to cope with his inner turmoil. By the time he reached high school, Jeffrey was drinking heavily, sometimes sneaking alcohol into class just to get through the day. His fantasies began to grow darker, blending his feelings of loneliness with a desire for control. He started imagining scenarios in which he had total power over another person. Fantasies that involved domination, violence, and even necrophilia. These thoughts were terrifying to him, yet he found them irresistible. After high school, Jeffrey's life took a downward spiral. His parents' marriage ended in divorce, and he was left to live with his father, who was now preoccupied with his new wife. Jeffrey felt increasingly abandoned, and his drinking escalated. In 1978, just after his 18th birthday, Jeffrey committed his first murder. Stephen Hicks was a hitchhiker Jeffrey picked up one evening. They bonded over a beer and music, and Jeffrey invited him back to his home. But once there, Jeffrey's desire for control overwhelmed him. He struck Stephen in the head with a dumbbell and then strangled him to death. After the murder, Jeffrey dismembered the body, meticulously wrapping each piece in plastic bags and later burying them in the woods behind his house. This act marked the beginning of a monstrous transformation. For nearly a decade, Jeffrey tried to suppress his urges, enrolling in a college and joining the military. But his alcoholism and inability to connect with others led to failure after failure. But by the time he returned to Milwaukee in 1981, he was a broken man, and it wasn't long before the darkness inside him resurfaced. From 1987 to 1991, Dahmer would go on to kill 16 more men. His methods were more calculated and methodical. He would frequent bars and clubs, often targeting young men of colour, many of whom were struggling with poverty or homelessness. He would lure them to his apartment with promises of money or alcohol, and sometimes even posing as a photographer, offering to pay them for nude photos. Once he had them in his apartment, Dahmer's ritual began. He would offer them a drink laced with sleeping pills, and once they were unconscious, he would strangle them to death. But death was not the end for Jeffrey's victims. He would often engage in acts of necrophilia with their bodies before dismembering them. His need for control extended beyond death, as he would keep trophies including skulls, hearts, and even entire skeletons hidden throughout his apartment. The gruesome details of Dahmer's crimes are almost too horrific to describe. He was fascinated with human anatomy and would carefully dissect his victims, removing their organs and preserving certain parts in jars or his refrigerator. Fridge. I can't say fridge. His apartment was a His apartment was a museum filled with remnants of his horrifying acts. But even more disturbing were Dahmer's experiments to create living zombies. He wanted his victims to be completely submissive, to exist in a state between life and death, under his total control. To achieve this, he would drill holes into their skulls and inject acid or boiling water directly into their brains. These experiments were futile as they were grotesque and only resulted in agonizing death for the victims. Despite the overwhelming evidence of his depravity, Dahmer managed to evade capture for years. There were moments when he came dangerously close to being discovered, but somehow he always managed to slip through the cracks. One of the most shocking examples of this occurred in May 1991, when a 14-year-old boy managed to escape from Dahmer's apartment. Naked and disorientated, the boy was found by two women on the street who called the police. When officers arrived, Dahmer calmly explained that Connie Rag was his 19-year-old boyfriend who simply had too much to drink. Despite the woman's protest, the police believed Dahmer's story and returned the boy to his custody. Within an hour, Connie Rag was dead. I'm not sure that is how you pronounce that last name, so I do apologise. It wasn't until July 22nd, 1991 that Jeffrey Dahmer's reign of terror finally came to an end. That night, Dahmer lured guards back to his apartment, but unlike the others, Tracy sensed something was wrong. As Dahmer attempted to handcuff him, Tracy fought back and managed to escape, running into the streets where he flagged down 2 police officers. When the officers arrived at Dahmer's apartment, they were met with a sense of unimaginable horror. Polaroids of dismembered bodies, a refrigerator containing human remains, and countless other gruesome evidence were found. Dahmer was arrested on the spot, and as soon after he confessed to all 17 murders in chilling detail. During his trial, Jeffrey Dahmer pleaded guilty but citing his uncontrollable urges and gruesome fantasies. The defense argued that he was a deeply disturbed man suffering from a severe mental illness. But the prosecution painted a different picture of a man who was fully aware of his actions and methodically carried out his crimes. After weeks of harrowing testimony, the jury ultimately found Dahmer to be legally sane, and he was sentenced to 15 consecutive life terms in prison. The sentence ensured that Dahmer would spend the rest of his life behind bars, where he would be safe from the outside world, but not from the demons that haunted him. In prison, Jeffrey Dahmer was a marked man. His notoriety made him a target, and he was attacked several times by his fellow inmates. Some saw him as a monster, while others believed he deserved a chance at redemption. Dahmer himself expressed a desire to be punished, stating that he wished for his own death. And on November 28th, 1994, Dahmer's wish was granted when he was beaten to death by another inmate, Christopher Scarver. While cleaning a bathroom in a prison gym, Scarver later claimed that God had told him to kill Dahmer, believing that his crimes were too horrific to go unpunished. The story of Jeffrey Dahmer is one of the most disturbing in history of true crime. It's a tale of unimaginable horror, of a man driven by dark desires and a system that failed to stop him before it was too late. His crimes left a scar on the city of Milwaukee and a lasting impact on the families of his victims. Obviously, I've known bits of Jeffrey Dahmer. Obviously, there was that thing on Netflix, wasn't there? I don't think I've watched all of it. I think I watched bits of it. If I've actually watched it, I know bits of this case. And I think there was something, a part of me that just didn't want to originally delve into this case because I knew it was so horrific. I mean, I definitely believe he knew what he was doing. I think the prosecution were right. I mean, I do believe it's a tough one because he definitely had dark thoughts. He was clearly disturbed, but I do think with his crimes, like he knew exactly what he was doing. There was a plan. He was aware of these dark thoughts, so he was aware they were thoughts, but yet he still acted. So I definitely believe the prosecution were definitely right in stating that he was legally sane. And also interesting that, prisons can be like that, like depending on your crime, it can be just as dangerous for you in prison, depending on the crime you've committed. And it's interesting that the guy that killed him thought that God was telling him that he wasn't being punished although he was in prison. That wasn't the punishment he deserved. very interesting indeed. It's so horrifying as well. But justice was served. But yeah, thank you for joining me tonight as we explored this chilling tale. If you found this story to be compelling and you'd like to hear some more, please consider subscribing and hitting the like button. And as always, sleep well and stay safe.